So tonight I want to talk about front suspension. Just a quick, I didn't even take a poll. I said, I don't know, what should I talk about next time? And someone, I don't remember who, said, why don't you talk about front suspensions next time? So here we go. And most of my comments have to do with MGB, but in the case of the front suspension, an Alec Isagonis invention in 1948, 49 or so, the front suspensions are all the same. The A-arm from a 1950 MGTD fits a 1980 MGB. Everything you can swap back and forth. You would not put a T-type front brakes on your MGB, but you could. You could put a Kingpin and brake and right on your car. It's absolutely stunning how similar, and the measurements stay the same. It's just great. It's wonderfully easy. In all the systems, they very slowly improve over that period of time from the first time that they used it on the YB or YT, and then up all the way up to 1980 MGB. Let's talk first of all about the shock absorbers. These are lever shocks. They're hydraulic shocks. They have fluid in them. There's two pistons. One piston has a steel piston ring. The other one has a rubber cup. There's a difference in how hard the resistance is to move it on the compression stroke and on the rebound stroke. So going down, it's harder to push the car down than it is for the body to go down than it is for the car to come up. There are lever shocks like when you hit a door, a commercial door. You get that arm up above with a great big cylinder up above that controls the opening and closing speeds. So the shock absorbers are filled with shock oil, which is a hydraulic oil with a seal sweller and an anti-foaming agent in it. You can use just normal hydraulic oil, but with a lot of bouncing, it'll start to aerate. And once that happens, then you end up with shocks that don't work as well. So the things that go wrong with the shocks is they get low on fluid because they leak. Not the rear shocks because the axle is above the pistons, but on the front shocks, the axle, the part that turns, lies halfway between the pistons. So whether it's a T-type or an MGA or an MGB, the earlier T-types use Girling front shocks, but from around 52 or so onwards, they all use Armstrong shocks. All use the same fluid. It's supposed to be a 20 weight hydraulic oil. If you can get some thicker oil at a motorcycle shop, that's great. Lucas, who makes, it's odd to talk about Lucas and lubrication, but Lucas Lubricants makes a hydraulic oil stiffener. And if you mix that some of that up with normal hydraulic oil, it'll be stiffer, or put that into your shock. You can get it into your shock. The stuff's really thick. Remember, Paul Harvey used to advertise motor honey, and there was STP oil treatment. This is what this stuff kind of is, and it can restore your shock or make your shock just a little bit thicker. We used to have Universal Oil Company in Ohio make us shock oil in 50 weight rather than 20 weight. And we'd take the shock off a car. You can take the back cover off. You got to be so careful not to ruin the gasket because there are no gaskets available, serviceable. And you take the valving out and you'd clean the shock out with some mineral spirits, and then you'd refill the shock with this 50 weight shock oil. And oh boy, it was great. But if the axle is loose, you can't really tell because it's all so tight, spring loaded up there. You can't tell it, but you can tell if it's leaking. And if it's leaking, game's up. You got to get another shock. You can buy a brand new shock, no problem. Lots of people offer those. But you can also get your shocks rebuilt. And you can send your shocks to one of two places, Apple Hydraulics. They used to be in Nostrand, New York. I'm not sure where they are now. And you can send them to Worldwide Imports in Madison, Wisconsin. We always used, my shop always used Worldwide in Madison, Wisconsin. And call on the phone, you'll talk to the owner's wife, Jane. She'll take care of you. So if you don't have to change shocks in pairs, you don't have to. Sort of makes sense so that they're both the same stiffness. You're going to change one, change both. They have core charges on MGB shocks, and they no longer have core charges on T-type or MGA shocks because no one ever sent them back in. So they don't have any cores. So you have to send yours in and get them rebuilt. So don't hesitate any longer this season, or at least not until about August, because they get really backed up. They got lots of shocks to do. So you're going to change your shock, get it off the car. How do you know a shock's bad? Well, if it's leaking, it's bad. The other way you know it's bad is because the car bounces. You put both hands on top of the fender and bounce it. And if you can get the car to bounce, you can get it to bounce up and down and up and down, the shock is toast. It should be very difficult to depress the front fender, and each fender, the resistance to movement ought to be the same. So shocks never fail at the same time. So if you've got one side that's stiff and one side that's bad, obviously you know the side that's bad. And again, you can argue you should change both shocks at the same time so they're matched. So that's about it on the shocks. Then you've got coil springs at the front end. Just as a rule, coil springs never go bad. That's the rule. Of course they do. I took a fractured coil spring off my MGA a couple of years ago. I had wheels that shook so badly going down the road that the shock couldn't dampen the what wasn't harmonic motion, but another motion, and it couldn't dampen that, and the spring work hardened and actually snapped. So you do see that. Generally speaking, the coil springs are the same all the way from TD up through MGB. Midget, the coil spring diameter is a lot larger, but there are tiny little variations between GTs and Roadsters and 74s and 74 and a halves with a raised ride height, and MGAs and MGA twin cams. And there are differences, but they're very slight indeed. If you take the springs off the car, if you're doing the front suspension and you take the springs off the car and you look at them and they're both the same height, you're okay. If they're different, you can get a set of coil springs. They're pretty inexpensive. You don't need a coil spring if yours are not good. Information's in your workshop manual about the free height of the spring. There's no way to collapse it. You can't put it on a scale and put it on your bathroom scale and put it in a press and compress it. You just break your scale. So just look for the freestanding height. It'll be okay. Some of them develop a curve. They've been in place for a long time and they develop a curve. Okay, you can make a case that you should change them. Or if you're really you're frugal, I suppose take the curve and put it the opposite way. At the bottom of the suspension, you've got a fulcrum pin, which is either attached to the frame of the car, T-types and MGAs, or is attached to the front crossmember, MGBs. Those A-arms come down, they're individual, they look like the letter A. Back here is the fulcrum arm, it comes down. And those hardly ever fail. Every now and then one of them's bent, you've hit something that's bent. But out at the end, where it sits at the bottom of the kingpin, unless the kingpin has been working correctly and pivoting correctly, there's a distance tube that gets sandwiched between the end of the A-arms, around which the bottom of the kingpin can rotate. That freezes up. Instead of the kingpin rotating on the steel sleeve, instead the whole system binds up. Something's got to move. Not much. You're moving just a little little tiny bit, you know, as you're going around, but that will cut slots in that half-inch bolt that goes through the bottom of the Kingpin assembly through the A-arms. Other than that, you don't need to get new A-arms. A-arms are just fine. But if they're elongated, if the holes are elongated from wear, I suppose you could weld washers on the end, but new A-arms are pretty inexpensive. If you have a anti-sway bar fitted, which is just nominally, all MGBs have a sway bar. I think most midgets have a front sway bar. MGCs have a front sway bar, but the MGAs did not get normally sent with a front anti-sway bar. That is the single nicest, most dramatic improvement that you can make for road handling, drivability, is to add a front anti-sway bar on your car. Now, some of the later MGAs are scooped out the frame extension that sticks out from in front of the rack and pinion. It's already got the divots in it. You just have to buy the brackets. You can use an MGB front sway bar and links. That's no problem at all. Fits right on. A T-type, now we're getting a little more complicated, but you can buy kits. I'm sure that you can buy a kit from the major suppliers to bolt that on. You need a different front A-arm because of the shock link, and in the case of T-types and earlier MGAs, you need a different spring pan, just to account for the bolt that goes through the A-arm and the spring pan. But all those pieces are relatively inexpensive. The spring pan itself hardly ever goes bad. Once in a blue moon, you'll see one that's rusted really dramatically. There's a little hole at the bottom part of the A-arm, the outside of the A-arm, to let water get out, water that gets trapped in a channel that holds the bottom of the coil spring. That lets the water out over a period of time. It gets rust and stuff in it, and then the water sits in there, and it can rust. So if you get the front suspension apart, and there's any question about the spring pan, if it's like uber rusty and it's really nasty, just get another one. That stuff's heavy duty. It's pretty cheap, pretty inexpensive to do. And in the case of the MGB, where we don't have the fulcrum and the shock attached to the frame of the car, we've got it attached to the front cross member. That cross member comes loose from the body, and just over a period of time, it's separated from the body by some thick rubber, well, thick on 3/8 of a quarter of an inch, thick rubber pads. And those, certainly by now, lots of them are worn. And you wouldn't notice this normally because all the weight of the vehicle is sitting on the front cross member. The only time that you're going to notice that there's a looseness is when the body rises up off the front cross member, which is like hardly ever, unless you hit a set of railroad tracks or something to know its speed. You almost get airborne. You wouldn't even notice it. But it does make a difference because the front cross member can end up shifting left and right, not much, but it can change your steering just a little bit, make the car seem a little squirrely. So if you want to see if the front cross member is tightly attached to the body on an MGB, you can, if his car's up in the air on a hoist, you can put your shoulder underneath the front wheel, put your shoulder on the wheel, stand up, and if that cross member is loose, the cross member, the shock, the spring, everything goes tunk 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 tunk. It's just a slam dunk. Or if you're on the ground, you can put a jack underneath the wheel, kind of dicey because the wheel wants to, kind of be right in the middle of the bottom of the wheel, but you can jack it up enough and you can see that whole cross member moves up and down. Those are horrible to change. You've got to take the whole front suspension apart. But you got to take the A-arms off and the springs out to be able to reach up in there and change the pads. there are three measurements, basic measurements that you have on a front suspension: caster, camber, and toe end. Now the camber and the caster are set on an MGB. There's no adjustment. You can fiddle around. You can make changes. Some of them are hit. You got to shim, do some stuff. But nominally, the caster is about 7 degrees. That allows you to not have to fight the steering wheel when you're up at speed. The greater the kingpin inclination, the greater the caster, the more the car wants to track straight down the road. And when you go around a corner and take your hands off the steering wheel, it wants to come back straight. But according to some people, and I don't know a lot about front end geometry and all the factors that go into it, according to some people, because front end geometry has a lot to do with what kind of tires you're running. If the MGB and all the cars prior to that were made with bias ply tires, it wasn't until around 64 or 65 that we got radial tires, but they never made a corresponding change with the caster. So you can buy anti-caster shims to take the caster from 7 degrees to maybe 3.5, 4 degrees. And by straightening up the kingpins, instead of being forward at the bottom, they're a little taller. It makes steering easier when you're going around corners, because you don't have to lift the car up and down. When you turn the steering wheel left and right, the car actually moves up and down. So all that work that you're doing at the steering wheel isn't just turning the wheels, lifting the car. So you can get rid of that, but you give up this track, this wonderful tracking. MGs the way they're set up is just fine. You don't have to fiddle with them at all. Now, if you're out racing or doing slaloms or stuff like that, all right, okay, you got a different set of rules. And I know you can buy, $5,000 coil over front suspensions and all this exotic stuff. You don't need it. I mean, you want a car that handles better, I don't go out and buy a Miata, but it's the suspension that's on there is like really durable. It's really nice. So the caster is about 7 degrees. The camber is about 1 degree. So if you're looking at the kingpins, if the wheels are out at the top, like a TC, the TC looks like a V. It's got that look. An MGB has got about 1 degree positive camber. You can check this by taking a carpenter square, sliding it along the ground up against the wheel, and if anything, the wheel ought to be kicked out at the top, just a smidge, which is a non-metric measurement, just a smidge at the top. The next thing on the setup is toe end, and you've got to have just a little tiny bit of toe end, 1/16 of an inch. Grand Rapids alignment, where we used to have our cars aligned for years, told me that once you go from bias ply to radial tires, the toe end, which is nominally 1/16 of an inch or so, goes to 0. But other people say no, because when you're pushing a car down the road, the front wheels tend to go out. So you got to have just a little bit of tug on them to keep them straight down the road. Whereas front wheel drive cars, it's the opposite. They want to dig in, so you got to have just a smidge of toe out on front wheel drives. This was explained to me just the other day by Glenn in St. Petersburg. But the only thing that you can adjust easily is the toe end. And there's lots of different ways to adjust the toe end. We used to have a pipe with an adjustable screw, and it was just a crude setup. You can take them lots of places, although the MGB is so narrow that a lot of alignment racks won't take it. Or they say, well, I'm sorry, but we don't have the MG specs in our computer. It's like, you don't need a computer. It's a 1/16 of an inch. Come on, dude. It's pretty easy. Other things that go wrong in the front end and more commonly go wrong in the front end are the kingpins. So you don't notice this quite so much on a T-type or an MGA. Those kingpins just bend. You hit something real heavy in the road, some obstacle, and they'll bend. I had one in the letter that I sent out, and so when you end up with a stub axle, and you hold the stub axle in front of you, and you're looking at how straight the kingpin is. And you look at it like this, and then you turn it 90 and take a look at it like that. If it's bent, you can see it. You can just plain old see it. We used to straighten them, put them in the press, and just bend them straight again. But you can buy new kingpins, T-types. That's TD, TF, MGA. But the MGB has got a much more durable kingpin. It does not bend, but instead it wears real badly at the bottom because it doesn't get greased enough. Jeff Powell, when he restored his MGB that he bought new in 1970, and he had about 100,000 miles on it and serviced it regularly. When he took it apart, there was nary any wear at all on the front suspension because he'd kept it greased. But everyone knows that isn't the case. And if you don't blame yourself, you can blame the DPO or 5 DPOs before who did not service the car, who did not grease it. Plus, there's some problems with the way that the greasing is done, and grease always takes the path of least resistance. And sometimes the grease doesn't get to where you think it should get. Anyway, if you keep the car greased, you got no problem. But if you do have a problem, you got to change the kingpins. Taking the kingpins apart at home, unless maybe you're in California, where apparently there isn't much rust, or Colorado or Arizona, any other place, doing kingpins yourself is all but, it's not impossible. We did them at the shop, but we had a torch, an oxyacetylene torch. We had special tools. We had a great big press to press the trunnion off the top. So we had the mandrels to push out the old bushings, mandrels to push in the new bushings. We had the factory reamers to ream it all out. We had our magnetic dial indicator to set up the end float of the kingpin on the stub axle. If you've got all that, sure, go ahead and do it. If not, buy a set of kingpins that are already done. It's just easier, just so much easier. I think maybe lastly are the wheel bearings themselves. And on a T-type, TC, TD, TF, MGA, they're all roller bearings. Midget, they're roller bearings. They're not taper bearings, they're roller bearings. And they just have to be greased regularly. Now, what does that mean? Every 12,000 miles? That's the frequency that I would suggest. Once every 5 years, once every 12,000 miles. And then beginning with the MGA twin cam and carrying over to the MGB and MGC, we've got taper wheel bearings. Oh boy, those are the nuts. Those are great. When you set those up, you have to use the right number of shims to keep the wheel bearings away from each other, even though the front nut is tightened up to 60 foot-pounds or 80 pounds. It's a lot. So that you've got 2 or 3 thousandths end float on the front suspension. If you've got disc wheels, it's easy. You can change the shims back and forth and get the right combination of shims. If you've got wire wheels, oh my gosh, just be prepared for it taking a while. It's easier sometimes to set the front wheel bearings up without the brake rotor on the hub, just so that it's not in the way. You don't have to fight with the weight, and set it up in oil rather than grease to get the right number of shims. And again, you're looking for 2 to 3 thousandths end flow. So if you're setting it up in oil, and you grab a hold of the front hub and push it in and out of the car, you can feel the tiniest tunk. Spins free, but it's got the tiniest tunk. Once you put grease in it, you can't feel the tunk anymore. So it's difficult getting the right number of shims. You can use a dial indicator. That is the hot setup. I mean, that's how to do it. But if you got the feel, you don't need the magnetic dial indicator, which you put between the brake drums or the brake rotor. Therefore, you have to have the brake rotor on, and put the movable pin on the stub axle. Then when you grab the whole system and move it in and out, you can see it moving 2 or 3 thousandths. So that's important. American cars aren't like that at all. You tighten up the nut till it stops, back the nut off until it just runs free, and put the split pin through. But on an MGB, you tighten up the front nut to about 60 pounds. And if you don't have enough shims in there, it locks up the front wheel. Duh, can't go anywhere. And if you have too many shims in there, then when you're all done and you grab the front wheel at say 12 and 6 o'clock, tunk, 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 you can feel it moving. You can always feel a little bit of play there, even when it's set up correctly, but it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of play. We had a racer one time. We didn't work on a lot of race cars, but he was traveling pretty high speeds, and he said, I get this shake through the steering wheel. And we went through a whole lot of stuff, and we finally ended up reducing the end float on those wheel bearings up front, and took care of a shaking steering wheel. That's usually not what causes a shaking steering wheel. Usually, when you get up to 50, 60, 70 miles an hour and the wheel starts to shake, it's because you've got a bad shock. That's almost always the reason. Sometimes it's the rims are bad. So the rims are made out of the wheel. I'm talking about disc wheels, not wire wheels. The disc wheels are made out of some pretty thin steel. And you remember what tire changing machines used to be and what they used to look like. They were huge, nasty, powerful pieces of equipment that would bend the wheel if you made a tiny little error. So just assume that someplace in the past someone's made a tiny little error, and the wheel is bent. Well, once it's bent, you can put 2 pounds of weights on it to try to balance it. You cannot get rid of the shake. So you can get your wheel re-rimmed. You can get it re-rimmed at Diamond Wheel in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You can buy Kingpins from MG's Unlimited in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Different firm. But Diamond Wheel will re-rim your wheels. I had a problem with my own MGA from the day I bought it, and I just couldn't comfortably drive that car over 70 miles an hour. It just shook so much. It shook so much, it broke my coil spring in the front. Shock couldn't handle the shake, and no matter what you did with the weights, it's horrible. I got them re-rimmed. Oh my gosh, it's like driving on glass. It is so smooth, unbelievably smooth. Wire wheels, once they're worn, once they're bent, you gotta buy new ones. And not all the new ones that come through are all nice and straight. If you want to be really hot, you want to do the whole setup, you buy new rims from Hendrix Wire Wheel in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he will put your tires, or the tires that he gets for you, on his machine, and he's got a razor, and they spin the wheel and move the razor across the wheel as it's spinning, and trim off just a little bit of excess here and there so that it's smooth. And oh boy, those are great. Alan Hendrix, Hendrix, does a great job at that. I don't know anyone else who does that, and I don't know anyone who does that with disc wheels, but Hendrix does it with wire wheels. So we've talked about the shocks, the coil springs, the kingpins, the wheel bearings, the wheels, the addition of a front anti-sway bar, which is the greatest thing that you can ever add to those early cars to make them handle well, the A-arms, and the front, easy for me to say, the front cross member on the MGB. MGCs use torsion bar suspension. You can't switch the torsion bars from side to side. I probably can't tell any MGC owner any more than they already know about their own front suspension. It's altogether different from any other MG, except what, a Q type, or they had some torsion bar suspensions pre-war, but it was an altogether different system. But the wheels and tires and wheel bearings are the same as a B, so those follow the same rules. So I think I've covered everything I can think of, but I'm open for questions now,
Yeah, John.
about front suspension. Steve.
Yeah, I'm guilty of asking to have the suspension the last time, but can you mention something about rear leaf spring suspensions along with the stuff you mentioned about the front?
Sure.
Is that going to be
Sure.
too much?
I can say a couple of things. It doesn't matter about the shocks in the back end having to do with the ride height. The ride height is a function of the springs. Normally, in the United States, on a left-hand drive car, the left rear spring begins to sag, the bachelor lean. As a result, the car pivots from the right front to the left rear, and that causes the right front to rise. So if you're looking at the front of the car, and it looks like the right front of the car, or the left as you're taking a look at it, the right front of the car is higher than the left front, it's probably because the leaf spring in the back is sagged. So if you have a T-type spring, you absolutely have to buy new springs, or a Midget. You got to buy new springs. No way out of it. But if you got an A or a B, you can take your springs to a spring shop. There's spring shops all over the place that will re-arch your rear springs. I don't know what they do. There's a great huge furnace and a couple of really rough looking guys. And I don't know what they do. They take the springs apart and they heat this. I don't know. I don't know what is involved. But I was always happy with Grand Rapids Spring. They've built hundreds of springs for us, and you got back a consistent set of springs. We always changed the second leaf, and we very often added yet another leaf. There are either 6-leaf springs for roadsters or 7-leaf springs for GTs. We very often added yet another leaf in there, somewhere between a foot and 18 inches long, just to ask them to add another strap of steel in there, because it is something that they can buy. It's a spring size that spring shops deal with. And you get back a set of springs that are matched and they're good. Sometimes, and that's the problem, sometimes it's erratic. Lots of people buy springs from the major suppliers. They're great, absolutely great, no problem. They put them on, the ass end is dragging. Maybe the ass end's way up in the air. Maybe they're different. Maybe they look good for 3 months and then they all of a sudden they fail. Oh my gosh. So don't throw away your old springs. And best to get your old springs re-arched. Other than that, there's front and rear bushings. You can get I didn't mention anything about the red bushings. You can get the urethane bushings. I like those. They last longer than the rubber bushings do. Maybe if you could still get factory quality rubber bushings, they might be okay to reuse. They were okay for a long time to start with, but some of the rubber that comes through the system now is just dismal and fails way too quickly. So the rear shocks either work or don't work. They almost always work. You can fill them up on an MGB. You fill them up through behind the seat. There's a little plug the size of a silver dollar right over by the wheel arch. Pop that off. Right underneath that is it's one of the British threads that's left in the car. Go figure. It's a 5/16 BSF cap. It's a bolt in there. Your 13mm socket will fit it. Blow all the dirt off at first, so dirt doesn't fall down inside the shock. You can put shock fluid in there. If it's leaking or shot, you can get some more shocks. I don't think you have to give a core charge on rear shocks. I think Peter Caldwell's got lots and lots and lots of those. There's some straps in the back that support they don't support. They limit how far the body can rise up off the rear axle. And they used to be made out of a fabric and rubber combination. They were great. More recently, they've been made out of rubber, and I think the shortest we ever had one, the shortest time it took for one to fail was 20 seconds. So that you can get fabric straps. So anyway, the straps only limit how far up off the leaf springs the body can rise. It's just in the front suspension, there's a thing up there that limits how far the compression and rebound stroke can be of the front suspension, so you don't end up banging. It's not metal against metal. You hardly ever collapse or rebound the car that much anyway. But the straps aren't essential. You can drive all day without them, but it's better if they're on there. And again, the original style are not available, which is too bad. So you have to buy fabric straps, but those are okay. They don't have much give to them, but they're okay. So that's changing the rear springs. You can make a case for doing one at a time, so the rear axle doesn't have to hang off the car, off the straps that are either not there or unsatisfactory. So just take one spring off at a time. I caution overuse of anti-seize in the car, but here is one place you want to use anti-seize, and that's on that 7/16 bolt that runs through the front of the eye of the leaf spring on the MGA and MGB. Oh my gosh, those once those rust to the steel sleeve on the inside of the leaf spring, the bushing that goes through there, I mean, you end up having to use the Sawzall. It's dicey getting those things off. In the shop, we had a torch. We just burned the heads off and cut the threaded parts off, bend them a little bit. We could get them to drop out. But at home, it can be a real challenge getting those off. Don't let that happen to yourself in the future, or the next guy who owns the car. Put anti-seize on that bolt. So you unbolt it from the rear axle first, unbolt it from the rear second, unbolt it from the front third, reinstall it in the opposite way. You have to use your jack, trolley jack, or a transmission stand, or whatever you got. It depends on if the car's on the ground or up in the air on a hoist. You got to compress that spring in the back to be able to get the U-bolts back through. There are two different U-bolts. There's one for roadsters. There's one for GTs, because the GT spring is longer. The GT U-bolts are longer. If you have your spring shop add a leaf to the spring, then you're going to have the longer U-bolts. The threads on the U-bolts, if they're old, oh my gosh, they're just shot. So better just buy four new U-bolts, and those just take 3/8 nuts. There's a torque setting on those. I don't know what it is. Must be around 20 pounds or so. You can crank them down so tightly that you can end up bending the plate that holds the shock link in the back that goes between the plate, the bottom plate there, and the rear shock. So that don't get them so tight you bend the plate, but you got to get them pretty tight. If you leave the rear U-bolts loose, because you don't know, you're doing this at home and you think, oh, is that tight enough? Yeah, I think that's tight enough. And you go out and drive the car, and it seems like what is going on is you accelerate and decelerate. The car wants to change lanes. It steers from the position of the throttle. We call that torque steering. That's because the rear axle is loose. All midgets torque steer, just a question of how much. But some of them do it a whole lot more than others. So just if your car is doing that, you got to tighten up the rear bolts. That's the quick explanation, Steve.
Okay, that's what I'm going to be working on this next couple of weeks is the rear suspension.
Okay.
My front suspension is pretty good, but I got to
talk all that time about the front suspension, and it was the rear suspension you wanted to know about?
Well, no, it doesn't hurt to learn about the front. Eventually I'm going to have to do something with the front, but I don't plan to do that this year. I got leaf springs. I bought new leaf springs, and I did watch your video. I don't know if you want to mention that about checking when you put them on a flat surface and you put your square up to them. It's supposed to be straight, and you have a gap or something like that. I did watch that video, and I did check mine, and mine are fine. So
Right.
I don't expect there to be any kind of a problem other than getting that front bolt out, like you said. But the videos I watched, everybody just seemed to just, slide them right in or right out of there, which is
Yeah,
right.
which isn't the way that it happens.
No, I'm sure it isn't. And I drive my MG as often as I can, so it's not a closet queen, but
So what you end up having to do, if that bolt will not separate from the steel sleeve on the inside of the front bushing, cut the head of the bolt off. Cut the head of the bolt off. Now you've got what's left of the bolt, and you put a pry bar underneath, a wonder bar, pry bar, crowbar underneath there, and bend the flange just a little bit away from it, and then bend the whole spring so much that you can slip the remainder of the bolt out of the other ear. So you're bending those ears considerably, but that's the only way to do it. And then you put the new spring up in there, slide the bolt through it, and when you tighten that system all back up, it'll pull the ears back straight. So you end up having to bend those ears.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I'm going to spray the hell out of them first before I do anything.
Sure.
I'll leave them set for a day or two and see how it works. All right. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
John, you said all midgets torque steer. Why? And what do you do about it?
Well, first of all, because the U-bolts are loose, but the length of the spring is different, or the springs aren't quite as strong. And so what happens is, if you're going down the road and you accelerate and decelerate, and the whole rear axle, the springs wind up just a little bit, and they touch just a little bit. I mean, you just get used to it. Most people don't even know it's happening until you're driving and you hold the steering wheel straight ahead, and at 30 miles an hour, you're in third gear, and you put your foot to the floor and really accelerate, and then take your foot off and really decelerate. And the car does, it steers one way or the other. So all you can do is tighten up the rear U-bolts. That's it. And then you probably didn't even notice it beforehand. Of course, once you notice it, you go, oh my God, now I can't get rid of it. So there are traction bars. The guys who put V8s in their car put traction bars on that will stop it from happening. But I don't remember ever having put a traction bar on a midget.
John, got a question for you about the new Kingpins.
Yes.
That are available. So the new Kingpins that are available, I just replaced them. The new Kingpins don't come with holes in the top of the Kingpins. They don't come with castellated nuts. They all now come with lock nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, I've always tightened them down as tight as I can get, and then put the pin, either loosened it up or tightened it up a drop mortar for the to get the pin in through the hole. With the new ones, I don't have that. Is there a torque setting, or you just get it?
Oh my gosh, that's a 5/8. That's a 5/8 bolt. That's a 5/8 18 or something. I mean, you can pull on that with an 18-inch breaker bar until it's as tight as it gets. I mean, you'll never be able to, not normally would you ever be able to get that so tight that it would damage it.
Well, my concern is too tight that it's not so much that too tight that it's going to damage it, or it's more not tight enough that I'm gonna run into an issue in the long run.
If you put your body weight on it like a normal breaker bar and just
Yeah,
get it really tight, I mean, I don't know what, 80 pounds,
okay.
that's just fine. And the castle nut on the top, you look at that. You go back pre-war MGs and the sump bolts, all the bolts that hold the pan on, you have to get the hole all straight ahead. And there's lock wire that goes all the way around the bottom of the sump. And later on, someone said, this is just nuts. We can just use lock washers there. So it's the same idea. It was overkill putting that castellated nut on there. And if you don't like it, you can always take the castle nut off your old one, and wire wheel it so it's all nice and everything, and put it on so it's real tight, and then take your 1/8" drill and drill a hole through it.
Yeah.
Yep.
One other question as far as torque settings, the steering arms that go to the
Yes.
tie rod ends, that normally have that lack of better term, that figure 8 locking tabs that go on there.
Yes.
Okay, what's the torque setting on those? Or is it
I don't. I'm in Alabama. I don't have my manual.
No, yeah, because I didn't see any. I didn't
be
see
60 pounds.
60 pounds?
I would, yeah. I mean, up around there, and there are certain places in the car where I use Loctite, and that,
Yeah.
I mean, that would, even though there are lock tabs there, I still would use Loctite. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I had one that decided to loosen itself up.
No
And
kidding.
when my wife was driving the car, she noticed, she's like, the steering seems a lot looser. I'm like, everything's
Oh my
tight,
gosh.
everything else, and I'm like, yeah.
Oh
So that
my
was,
gosh.
it wasn't much, but it was just enough that you could actually feel it. So yeah, so that was
Oh
fun.
my gosh. Yeah, I do genealogy, and I was chasing all the descendants of a great grandfather, and I ended up with finding a guy in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he lived a couple blocks away from my brother-in-law. It was so bizarre, and I went over there to meet him and talking about this. And his mother was there. She remembered my mother. They were, second cousins or something. And oh, what do you do? What do you do? And I said, I do MGs. He said, we had an MG once. He said, my wife is going around a corner, MGA, going around a corner, turned the steering wheel, and the steering wheel came off the steering column.
Yeah.
He said, so we don't have that car anymore. We had to sell it because my wife refused to drive it. Oh my God, that stuff is so creepy. And it almost always, it's because someone else has had it apart before you got it.
Well, in this case, it was a matter of, I guess, I must have not whacked that one thing as tight as I needed to.
No, blame the former owner. Don't blame this.
Well, I'm still happily married, so, and she's more than happy to drive it again. So at least I'm that in that sense.
Jeff Powell has a TC, and the TC is altogether different. It's got a Bishop cam box in it. It's a horrible steering, and even when it's good, it's horrible. You don't steer a TC; you just aim it. And there's a sector shaft, and the sector shafts can and do fail. So he raced his car via CDA racing, and he was out on the racetrack, and he came around some corner into the straightaway, and all of a sudden his car ceased forward motion. It put it up on the trailer and took it home and took the differential apart, and he'd run all the gears off the crown wheel and pinion. Just the way it is. It's a bevel gear, not a hypoid gear. It's a big dramatic change when they went to the TD and got a much better differential. Anyway, he worked with that all winter and got it all done, and took it out and was driving around the block just a couple times just to feel it. And he said the steering got kind of wonky. He's turning it, and all of a sudden the wheel's absolutely free. So I don't know how he got the thing home, but anyway, the sector shaft had fractured and had come apart. And he said, my God, if that had happened on the racetrack at 80 miles an hour, and here instead it was the differential which had failed,
Yeah.
and pushed him off the racetrack before the steering failed. I mean, what chances are of that, you know? So anyway,
Fingers
Yeah.
crossed. Yeah. Good luck. All right. Thank you very much for the
hey,
info.
you're very welcome. Other questions about front suspension?
Hey, John.
Yes.
Peter Miller.
Yeah.
I never got an answer for this from anybody. Wire wheels, the knockoff caps, I just whack them with a brass hammer or copper hammer. What's the rule? I mean,
Whack him with a brass hammer. It's like, you know, each whack with the hammer moves it a certain amount. Bigger the hammer, the more you can move it. But if you're using, you know, it's better to use a lead hammer because that folds around it, or a dead blow hammer with a plastic face. You can go to Harbor Freight. It's always a reason to go to Harbor Freight. Actually, I've never been to Harbor Freight myself, but anyway, and get a dead blow hammer. Got a great big head. It's got shot in it. You can hear it, and that's so when you hit it, it doesn't bounce. It stays there because the shot follows the movement, and then just at the time it wants to bounce back, the shot hits on the inside and gives it a double hit, so it doesn't bounce. Anyway, those are really good for tightening up the spinners, unless you use, and I've got a video up. I've got a video up. It isn't published yet, with a guy who's made yet another great big wrench for tightening up spinners with nylon wheels. It's all real cool, tightens them up. But I myself, I just use a dead blow hammer, and I tighten it up. And each time you hit it, it moves a half an inch, and then a quarter of an inch, and then an eighth of an inch. And when you get down to where it's only moving, you know, a 16th of an inch, stop.
perfect. All right. Thank you. Best answer ever. Thanks. Good man.
More front suspension questions? No more front suspension questions. We usually have a couple more. You know,
Want to talk about the dust seals made out of urethane now, or the 3D molded ones?
Did it
3D
slip
printed
down
ones?
inside the wire wheel?
No. The dust seals for the trunnions.
Okay.
You know, the rubber seals.
Okay. All right. So when you're putting together the bottom of the Kingpin on the TD through 1980 MGB, there's a distance tube, must be about 2.5 inches long or so. It fits between the A-arms. And on either end of that is a hardened, supposed to be a hardened washer, because when the car comes to a stop, the distance tube comes to let's see, what comes to a stop? The distance tube comes to a stop, and then the A-arm jams up against it. So you got to have these hardened washers, and then on the outside of that are some just little thin tin washers, and around the outside of that are these little dust seals that are designed to keep water and dirt from the inside of that bottom pivot on your Kingpin, to keep the grease in and the dirt out. And you're telling me that they're made out of they're different now? Oh, you're muted, Fred. You're still muted.
Oh, there you go. Okay, sorry.
Okay. That's right.
They have some 3D printed ones now that last forever.
Where do those come from?
There's a guy on the MG Experience. His daughter is printing them. And they're available on Etsy.
Okay.
There's also a guy, Declan Burns in Germany. He 3D prints those as well. And so you can get a set from him. They also do the rubber boots on the Kingpins for the A and the T series. So those will last. They'll last forever. The other thing is Declan also makes ones that are like a C-clip that you can put a bolt through or just a lock wire, so you don't even have to take the suspension apart when you put them on. You just slip them on there and tighten up the wires.
This is just a horrible problem for MGA owners whose original seals on the Kingpins lasted for 48 years, and the new ones from the major suppliers last for 3. Sometimes they don't last. Sometimes you put them on, and by the time you're restoring the car, they're shot. Very frustrating. So, okay, so thank you very much. Those are 3D printed, and you can wrap them around later on the Kingpins. You probably have to take the front, those top and bottom bolts out though to get those changed.
Yeah, it's easier to slip those on if the bolt's a little bit loose, because it is a tight fit.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah,
Fred, thank you
Declan
very
Burns,
much.
yeah, Declan Burns in Germany. He's also on the MG Experience under the T series group.
Okay,
Hey, John, Gerard D'Angelo from Yardley. How are you?
yay, great.
Hey, listen, just another question about the Kingpins. As far as when you tighten down the castle nut on the top of the Kingpin, there was like a test where you could put a pinch bar or something underneath the tire. You could jack the car up a little bit, put a thing, so like a bar of metal under the tire, and like try to lift up the tire up and down vertically on the Kingpin to see if there was a little play in the Kingpin.
Sure.
And my question to you is that I have a set of Kingpins that I've been messing around with, and there are like, for the lack of a better term, brass washers or big washers up on the top, just underneath the trunnion.
Bingo.
Can you adjust that spacing in order, because when you tighten the castle nut down to a specific torque setting, can you, like as if you were doing the bearings on the front of a wheel, can you adjust that? If there's
Yes.
any play, or do they have to be redone?
When you buy a kit,
Yeah,
Quentin Hazel kit, whatever, there are, I swear there's 24 of those that come in the kit. And they range all the way from around, I don't know, 48 thousandths up to about 70 thousandths. There's quite a range of thicknesses, and you have to fit them. And you do all this with oil, and you've already passed a 5/8 drill bit through the trunnion, so it comes on and off because you got to tighten the nut up. Use a regular nut or use that old castle nut. Tighten it up. And then you see how much end float there is between the stub axle and the Kingpin. And nominally, you should be looking for 3 or 4 thousandths, just enough so it'll spin. But yes, the kits come with those. If it's too thick, you can always take that brass washer and scrub it on some paper, and keep getting it thinner. And it's like test. So it drive you crazy taking that nut on and off the top, pulling the Kingpin out of the trunnion, and oh boy, it's a hassle. But if you want to get it right, that's the way to do it.
Well, I recently did get my front dampers and the rear dampers redone by Worldwide Auto Imports, and made a major difference in the ride of the car.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yep. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.
John, this is Dave in Omaha.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the different kind of materials for bushings on the front end? There's such a variety here. What's your recommendation on that?
Oh, okay. So Fred Horner will come in because he knows a lot about this stuff too. But the original ones were just fine. Although at the back end, the A-arm bushings, the ones that go between the A-arm bushings and the Fulcrum, there were 2 at each point. You brought them in from the other side. They're a really old part number, AAA something or other. And the original ones were kind of okay, but by 1980, even the new ones started to walk out of there pretty fast. The replacement ones of that style are horrid. They come in major suspension kits and stuff. You don't even use them for something else. Use them to hold pencils on your desk or something. I mean, they're just awful, horrible. So then the next hot setup there was the V8 bushing, and they used that on the MGB GT V8. It's a steel sleeve bushing, and I had those on my MGA for a long time. They were great. when they were factory. Now, of course, they're made with the same kind of rubber or the same process or the same people or whatever as some of the other rubber parts are from some of the major suppliers, and they aren't very good at all. So the next two are the red ones, the urethane, and then there's black ones. I don't know what the difference is between red and black. I don't know. I use the red ones myself. You got to coat them really well with the silicone goo that comes with it, or they squeak. And you can buy more Sil Glide from Napa to just gob those things up, because if it starts to squeak, you got to take the whole thing back apart again. I mean, you can't spray anything; nothing will get in there. It just drives me crazy every time it moves. It squeaks. So I prefer the red ones, and those are the only ones that I know. The crummy attempts at duplicating the factory ones, black ones, the rubber ones, and then the urethane style that are polypropylene. I don't know. I don't know anything about plastics. I don't know. But I use the red ones, but I know black ones are available. And people say, well, I know I want real stiff bushings in there. And you go, well, you want real stiff bushings, just go find some needle bearings. Put a bearing in there, and then you'll feel every single bump in the road. I mean, it'll drive you crazy. So the reason that they're soft is to isolate you at the steering wheel and in the seat a little bit from stuff in the road, just to get rid of the vibrations. So you don't want them too hard. So with that said, Fred, what do you know about these?
I use the black ones. I think they've been working great.
Okay.
But there were some that were available from Victoria British, I believe, that were really stiff, and they actually were kind of brittle, so they would crack. But I've never had any problems with the regular black ones.
Okay.
Can I jump in? I recently redid the entire suspension with the purple ones, because I have the red ones on my ones on my bug eye. I have the red ones on my bug eye because that's a much stiffer ride. And that's fine. But I tried the purple ones, and between updating with new shocks from Peter at Worldwide and the purple bushings, which are coming out of Australia, I live where there's a number of railroad crossings around me, and instead of hitting the railroad crossings and feeling it, it literally goes bloop. My Midget goes bloop, right over all the railroad crossings. It absorbs them beautifully. There is no squeak if done properly. I don't really want to be a salesman, but I'll tell you something. I'm really, as Gerard's laughing at me, I'm definitely recommend those stupid purple ones. Even if you put them in just a couple of spots at a time, I'm really happy with them.
Where do you find these? How do you find them?
So those are coming. They're advertised in the Moss catalogs in their shiny pages,
Okay.
like a better term,
Yep.
and they're coming out of Australia.
Okay.
So it was a little bit of a wait for it, but since I had the whole car apart, I'm telling you, I'm ecstatic with those things. I'm absolutely thrilled with them. So give them a shot, or find somebody else who's dumb like me who's giving it a shot and try them.
So we got black, red, purple, and the original rubber ones so
Yep.
far.
Yeah, the black ones too. I've never had to lubricate them.
Okay.
John, what did you say you lose for lube on the red ones?
It comes with a little tiny plastic squeeze of silicone lubricant, and you can buy more of that under the trade name of Sil Glide, SILGLYDE. Use that stuff when you're assembling all you're rebuilding brake calipers or master cylinders or stuff like that. Sil Glide.
Great, thanks.
Now, when you say the black bushings, are you talking about the ones that are the V8 type bushing?
The ones in the shiny pages.
Yeah, they're urethane, and there's two pieces per pivot. They're just like the old black ones, except they're not as thick and they're much more durable.
They're hard. They're much harder than you got rubber ones that I'm not keen on, only because of the quality of the rubber. But that's what was in there to begin with. The softer you get, the more bump over the railroad tracks you get. The harder they are, the more you get over the railroad tracks. So, and I don't know how to compare the black ones that Fred's talking about and the red ones that I've got. I've never done any comparative analysis, one car to another, but Fred's keen on those. They don't need lubrication. I've been using red ones, which do need the silicone on them. We've heard about the purple ones that are, again, still available from Moss. Any more comments about front suspensions?
John, talk about the that big washer on that pivot point for those bushings, and there's really like it's a distance piece where the bushings go, and then a big washer which butts up against the end of that step, and then the nut threads on there. Right?
So on the fulcrum,
yeah.
which has got BSF threads up through the end of TF, and then jumps to American thread. Other than that, it's the same piece from 1950 to 1980, the fulcrum arm back there. That's got a turned surface on it, and right at the very end of the turned surface, before you hit the threads, there's another diameter, and there's a great heavy. I mean, what's that? Eighth inch thick. I mean, they're great, massive, thick washers that have got a diameter that fits over that step, and then the castle nut goes up against that. So you don't want to throw those away. You want to reuse them unless new ones come in the kit that are the right size. They're just washers. You can clean them up fast enough on a wire wheel and paint them or something or other. One thing I didn't mention is when you go to tighten up those castle nuts on the fulcrum, you want to have the front suspension fully loaded, so that you're not tightening them and then releasing the car onto the ground, and now the bushings you've just paid all this money for are now under some slight stress. So take your trolley jack and bring it in from the opposite side. Jack up the spring pan as far out to the outside as you can get, towards the outside of the A-arm, as far as you can get. You don't crush the backing plate, the dust shield that goes behind the rotor, but jack it up back there until the car just starts to lift. The whole car starts to lift off the jack stand or however you've got it supported. And then tighten those up. Then tighten up those castle nuts. And finding that's underneath there. It's dark. It's oily. It's greasy. It's unless you've redone everything. So take a paint pencil before you take before you put those castle nuts on, and draw on the end of the stud that comes out. Draw the line that shows about where that split pin goes, so you can at least get that castle nut lined up. And how tight should that castle nut be? My guess is somewhere 40-50 pounds, around there. There probably is a figure in the workshop manual, but I don't have a workshop manual to look it up in.
I just make it tight and then make sure I get the pin in it. That's it.
Yep. Any more questions about front suspensions?
I got a question for you, Mr. T.
Yes.
Yeah, so the front, the steering rack on the TD.
Yes.
So I rebuilt it and I put the bellows on, and never even got the car on the road, and they already got holes in them. So you know, I'm trying to find something that will retrofit, like from an American car, that we know is better quality. Does anybody have any interchange numbers for these things?
That will be tonight's takeaway if someone's got a number. That would be so nice to find something from a modern Chevy or Ford.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to
Yeah.
use a Ford one on the MGBs, and they were real expensive. I mean, a pair of them was $62 or something, but they were great. You know,
Well, I think MGB and TD are the same part number.
Close. It has to do with it with the national diameter of where it attaches to the rack housing. That TD rack housing is pretty good size there, but
I don't know where to begin. There's no way for me.
yeah, I don't. You can't walk into someplace. Anybody have a clue? Fred, you have a clue?
I have no idea. I just
Okay. So-
buy the ones that they sell and you
Yeah.
know, live with it.
So tomorrow I'll talk to Glenn at Glenn's MG service, or Paul or Ian at Sports Car Craftsman. Those are the two big shops in the United States. They each have around 10 employees. I mean, they're both big shops and they do mostly MGs, and I'll see what they're using.
Okay.
You know, in the next email that I send out, if I get a number,
All right.
I'll put down Sandy Brainsky's name and I'll put down that part number.
Got my fingers crossed. I was thinking, is any going to England any better? Brown and Ganem or something?
You know, I mean, even Moss Europe doesn't use the same sourcing that Moss America does. I don't know why. It just drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Why?
It's a big issue.
Why
All these
isn't it
rubber
any
parts.
better? Why? I mean, this has been a problem from our major supplier here for 40 years. I mean, it isn't just last year. It's 40 years of rubber parts that fail all too quickly, you know? So,
And our racks, they run with oil, so all the oil just pours right out.
okay. I will find out for that. Rack
Thank you,
boots.
John. Fingers are crossed.
Yeah, yeah. So we found that one for, as I said, for MGBs, the Ford one. The last time that I went to Napa to get them, they said, nope, not in the catalog. And I said, well, I mean, they didn't listen under MG, they listened under Ford. And I said, well, do they give you a substitution? Nope. I said, well, are there any left any place? I mean, are there a dozen left someplace that I could buy? No information available, just gone. It's so sad. I don't remember what it fit, you know, like that 1982 Pinto, or I don't know anything about American cars, but it fit some kind of front wheel drive. I remember that, but anyway, I will find out for you, Sandy.
Perfect. Thank you.
John, I just looked online and AC Delco makes a steering rack boot that fits 1977 MGB, so I'm assuming it fits them all.
Really? Where'd you find that?
I just Googled it and it came up as an AC Delco part.
Okay.
Could you paste that into the chat?
Well, or give us the part number right now and Marty will put it in the chat.
Well, it says manufacturer number 45A 7000.
45 Alpha 7000.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Sandy, maybe that's an answer, but I'll still talk to the guys in these other shops. And
what car is that supposed to fit?
It fits a 1977 MGB, which would be all of them, really.
yeah, be all of them. Go figure. Okay. Hey, sounds cool.
John,
Yes. Guido,
what's going on? How you doing?
look, hey,
Um,
great.
I'm getting off the subject, but my 1970 has an alternator. It was converted from the generator. You know the belt number for that, John?
No, I don't. You're gonna have, you have your old belt?
Yeah, I have the old belt, but it's got some crazy
Well, that's
numbers
okay,
that
but it used to be, can't tell you now, used to be, if you took your old belt, you could take it into Napa, and they had a stretcher, you know, and they
Okay.
could stretch it, and it would say, oh, well, you want a 3775, and they give it to you. It would be the same size. You might say, I want it a little shorter, a little longer. So
Yeah.
that would handy.
Okay, I can do that. I can do that.
Okay,
All right, thanks.
you're welcome. All right, well.
All right, I have a question if we have time. Since we went from suspension into the steering rack, I maybe made the mistake of taking apart my tie rods, not the tie rod ends.
The inner tie rod end, you unscrewed that from the end of your rack and pinion?
Felt a little gritty as I was moving the.
Okay, so we're dealing with an MGB?
No, it's a Midget, 72 Midget.
72 Midget.
So yeah,
I cannot close my eyes and see what kind of. We're dealing with the inner ball joint on the end of the rack, where the tie rod starts there and goes out to the tie rod end.
That's right, exactly.
Okay,
right.
all right.
And
Well,
it's a big nut that holds the ball, and then there's a smaller nut that closes that into.
All right, so you
with shims.
One of them was shims on top of that.
Yeah, and a plastic. So there's a plastic piece in there that is curved to one end of the,
which is the socket.
One hemisphere of the ball goes out through the nut.
Okay.
And the other hemisphere of the ball is supported by this plastic piece, and then behind the plastic piece are shims, and then there's a nut that goes into the.
Okay.
Closes off that end.
Well, naturally over a period of time, it wears. And what you don't want is that tie rod to move in and out of the rack. You want it snug, but it's got to be free to turn, and it's got to be fully articulated, which means you can push it, at its greatest and all the way around without any restriction to movement at all. So if you want to make it move more easily, if the shim goes behind the seat, the shim's behind the seat, then you got to take a little tiny shim out of there, or take the seat and just scrub it on a piece of sandpaper, just a little tiny bit to make it thinner, so that now that it's not quite so tight, but it shouldn't feel sticky or gravelly. But what happens over a period of time is where the ball comes up and catches it's so hard to explain this stuff. You've got the ball that makes and it isn't a ball. There's a hemisphere on one side and a different hemisphere on the other, and then the rod comes out of it. But where that nut comes up against it, it wears, and because it's always in the same spot, it's always wearing in the same spot. So what we used to do on T-types and MGAs is we take the tie rod and the cover that went against it, chuck the tie rod up in the lathe, or you can use an electric drill. Get some lapping compound from Napa, put that on the inside and spin it, and then make that ball nice and smooth. Keep moving that ball around so that it was all ground down. You're not grinding it much, all ground down, so that, and then get it all nice and clean and put it all back together. And that'll probably be great. But now, of course, it's going to be smaller than it was. So it may have some of this, so you got to put something else beside. It's tedious. You're doing this off the car?
Yeah.
Good, okay, good, good. All right, okay. Anyway, so that's what we used to do on T-types, is use, you just go to Napa and buy valve lapping compound and just spin that tie rod and then get the housing that goes around it, the big nut that goes around it. And then when you go to get it all clean and put it back together, I don't know if that nut goes all the way tight. On the MGB, it doesn't. You just tighten it up until you get the right amount of articulation, and then run the other nut up and jam it up against it. I can't close my eyes and see how that midget works.
Mhm. Okay, interesting, because the manual talks about putting in too many shims, tightening it all the way, which precludes it moving
And then
freely.
subtracting 13 thousandths from it and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
My
well-
problem is I took it apart, cleaned it, greased it a little bit, put it back together with the same parts that came out of it, and it seizes up. If I tighten it all the way, then it won't move. So I don't know if I bent some of the shims and if that would make the difference.
No, underneath that. In the end, you've got to be able to rotate the tie rod real easily, because you got to turn it into the tie rod end, and it has to be fully. It's got to move pretty. Some people say, "Oh, you got to move it up, and it's supposed to stay there." But to me, it's like, no, you want it. You want it. If you move it up so it stays there, and you just touch it, it should fall. Call me tomorrow, and let me take a look at a blow apart diagram somehow. I don't have my books here. But let me find an online picture of that somehow and see if I can get a better understanding of how that works. But that's what we used to do is because that's that part of it's metal, the cap that goes around that and bed that in with that lapping compound, so there's nothing in the way. And I wouldn't set it up with grease, I'd set it up with oil. Because that's
I was wondering.
That's what's in there in the end anyway. And grease is a little sticky, can be a little sticky. So just set it up.
And takes up too much volume, maybe. I was wondering about that.
Oh, maybe. I mean, yeah, theoretically.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So good luck. Where are you calling from?
I'm out in Santa Monica, California.
Oh yeah, all right, great. Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, need to get this done because it's 65 degrees.
Yeah. My daughter lives in LA, and yeah, she's waiting for a brake light switch. She bought a brand new brake light switch, and out there with her 9/16 wrench to put the thing in, and gets it screwed in. Got her amazing her boyfriend, right? Because she can use tools, and she gets it partway screwed in, and the friggin' wire comes off because it wasn't soldered right. It's like, oh please, So anyway, okay, all right. So I'm going to go over to the chat section.
On the steering rack bellows,
Yes.
Summit has AC Delco Gold with the same number the gentleman gave for $13.99 a piece. You don't buy them you buy them separate, but they
Okay.
Summit Racing has those.
Summit Racing has the AC Delco. All right, so you don't have to call me tomorrow. We've got this done. Racing, and there no doubt if AC Delco makes them, they're going to be better quality than the ones made. I mean, God knows that these are made in China, but they're made with people with better quality control people or something. So thank you very much.
And it does say gold, whatever that means. They call it AC Delco.
AU like GOLD.
It lists MG on that too.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Okay.
Would you repeat the number, please?
I believe we're
The
dealing
number is ADO 45A 7000.
Thank you. Okay, Summit Racing.
I just
Okay,
put the link in the chat.
thank you, Marty. Thank you very much. All right, well, it is, oh my gosh. I gotta go over to the chat so that we get stuff done here. Let's see. Pat Garrity, any idea why MG added so much caster to the front ends over the years? No, I have no idea. I don't know. To make driving down the road, you're gonna have to fight the steering wheel. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's got more caster than a TC. I'm sure of that. Ryan, what are the torque settings on the Kingpin bolts with new locking bolts instead of castle nuts? Talked about that. That's like really tight. How's that? RT, really tight. And it isn't going to come off. Let's see, David Vasily, what's a good source for the copper and brass washers, thrust washers for a 1980 MGB differential? Help me out. Somebody talked about this before. Who had the different sizes of washers? I wrote that down a couple times ago. Someone in England, or is it the firm was it Brown and Gammon? I think it was Brown and Gammon's. Tony Choviak, I think, dangled those out in front. So the copper and brass thrust washers for 1980 MGB, David Vasily, you can get those from Brown, BROWN, ampersand, Gammon's, GAMMONS, who trades, it's like UKMGparts.com or something. But if you Google Brown and Gammon's, they'll get it. You can call them. You can give them your charge card number. You'll have it here as fast as anybody in this country can deliver a part. And they have some that are a little thicker than others, which, oh, it's already in there. Greg already put that in Brown and Gammon's. So, all right. Okay. So we got that one answered. Let's see, Dave Middlebrook. I was driving my 70 MGB using the wipers, which started working normally, but at some point, both wipers would only tip about 30 degrees on the top part of the arc. Turn them off, and they both park in the 12 o'clock position. Any idea about what's broken and how much has to be pulled apart from under the dash to fix it? Yes, this is easy, Dave. The wiper motor on your MGB is located above the passenger knee, way on the right-hand side of the dash. Maybe there's still a cover, what you call it, cover on the underside of the dash. Hope not, because it's a whole lot easier with that out of there. That wiper motor is attached to the rack housing. Here we're just talking about rack and pinions. Well, this is also called a rack and a rack housing. And there's a gland nut that attaches the rack housing to the wiper motor. That's come loose. You need a 3/4 inch wrench. You can start it by hand, thread it all the way down, almost all the way tight. Just give it a snug. Doesn't have to be super tight. Just give it a snug with a 3/4 inch wrench. That's what the problem is, probably. I'll give you 9 out of 10 that I'm right on that. So let's see.
Well, yeah, thanks for that, John.
Oh yeah, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Sydney, Australia.
Oh, okay. Well,
and also for those bush kits that are made from the purple polyurethane, I put them on my car, and I got them from a company called Fulcrum Suspension.com.au.
FULCRUM, Fulcrum
Suspensions.
Yep.
Plural. .com.au.
.co.au. Okay. Okay. All right. That's very kind. Thank you very much. What's your temperature today?
It's a bit cool here today and a bit overcast. It's about 20 degrees Celsius. So
take a while. Okay. All right. Times 9 divided by 5 plus 32. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Thanks for tuning in. All right. Let's see. Pat Garrity, shock absorber is a misnomer. The British used the correct name, damper. Yes, springs absorb the shock, and dampers slow the movement. So, yep, the dampers, they dampen the harmonic motion of the coil springs. Thank you. Ed Cook, any tips or tricks on adjusting a door window glass on a BGT? I loosened about every nut and bolt I could find. Not much luck, only at the last inch to the top of the window. It's very close to the B pillar. Oh, well, that window is, are you still on, Ed?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yep.
Okay, great. So that window is held up against the immovable part by that rear track. I mean, that rear track pushes that window up against the front track.
Right.
So that loosens top and bottom, and so it has to, the solution has to lie in there. Are those new windows?
No, so the rear track does more than the front where the vent window is. You're saying
the vent window track, that's fixed.
Yeah,
So
pretty much.
So the only thing that can control the fore and aft movement is that back track.
Okay, I'll try moving that more then. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, I tried to just shove it over and it didn't seem to work. But
well, the top's got a Phillips screw in it, like a quarter 28 Phillips screw, and that's only so that it doesn't protrude and push the interior panel out of the way. And it also has, there's a sheet metal bracket that comes off that. It could be that the sheet metal bracket's bent. I mean, you might have moved it as far ahead as you can, but now you've got to take the whole track out of there. Good luck. Oh my gosh. And bend those brackets so that it will push it farther forward.
Okay, so I wanna move the rear track forward toward the front of the car is what you're saying. Somehow. Okay.
So the window follows in. Lots of people talk about lots of ways to get the glass to slip in that felt. And it sounds so crude, but I always used engine oil. I just glug, ran engine oil down both of those. And then you'd run it up and down 20 times and wipe off all the excess oil and
okay. Because I couldn't get the front track to move much unless you move the whole thing in the door, and there really is no play in the front that I can see.
No, that's fixed.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fixed.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, I'll work on that end now. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, Janet and Reg. John, I recently reinstalled carbs on my MGA. I had not made any adjustment to them. The car appears to be running too rich and higher RPM a higher RPM than required. I noticed the piston assembly is very hard to move up and down in the chamber when the damper is screwed down. However, when the damper is not screwed down, the piston moves very freely. Any thoughts? Well, are you still on?
Yeah, John, I'm here.
Okay, great. So the oil in the carburetor dash pots is designed to restrict the upward movement of those air pistons. Yes. And I just did Glenn's car and I put 90 weight gear oil in there. And I mean, you could barely push the damper down into the dash pot. I mean, it was really tough to do. And if you use your fingers trying to lift the pistons, you just got to wait. And finally you can get them up. But when you get them up and pull your fingers out, they should fall really easily.
Okay.
If they don't, then take the suction chamber off and take some carburetor cleaner and clean out the outside. You can take the air piston out and clean that off. Don't drop the air piston. It's got that brass needle in it.
Yeah.
And then as a function of speed and mixture, there's 100 possibilities here. But the first one is if they were off, maybe the throttle cable is in a different position than it was before. because you disconnected it and reconnected it too snugly, maybe because it's got a twist in the cable because you took the carburetors off and when you put them back on, anyway, the engine idle speed has only to do with the screws, with the idle screws, which are on the body themselves, unless you've got a leak in a gasket. If you've got a leak in a gasket, then that'll drive you crazy trying to get it sorted out. So you can check with spray carburetor cleaner, the same stuff you use to clean the dashpots, and spray it between the head, the manifold, the heat shield, and spacer blocks and the carburetors. And if the gasket was torn, and it sucks that stuff in, it will change the speed of the engine.
Oh, yeah.
He always uses propane and just an unlit propane torch and puts it down there. I always use carburetor cleaner.
Yeah, I've used it before.
Okay, all right, okay.
I'll try it. John, I want to jump in on one last thing. We were talking about wheels on an MGA.
Yes.
When I put my car back together, the back two wheels wobbled like a duck in the back. So I ended up taking them to a place here this is in Vancouver, Canada, Green Wheels, and they shaved out a little bit of material on the back side of the inside of the hub, and they are as straight as a dime. They run now.
Very cool.
They did a great job. The guy charged me, just so you know, $100 each Canadian, so that's 70 odd. And he said I didn't make any money on these at all. But he said they're just like brand new.
Hey, great. Well, that's the whole point, is to have them not wobble. So great.
So that's Green Wheels, and it's actually in Richmond, BC.
Richmond, BC.
Yeah, it's a suburb of Vancouver.
Yeah.
So anybody else might want to look their way.
Okay, I looked forever and couldn't find anybody to straighten wheels. Nobody to straighten a wheel. So that's why I had mine re-rimmed.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the advice.
All right. Let's see, we've got Marty here. Here we got Gerald Gregory. But I can't read the whole last name because of the way this is set up. D'Angelo, rebuilt dampers gave my 79 MGB Roadster a new life. So that's a testimony to getting that done. Bill Weekly, I've got a MGB front suspension on my 56 MGA. I use the MGA lever shocks with spacers, because an MGB trunnion at the top is this wide, and an MGB trunnion at the top is that wide, so you have to take up that space. The disc brakes are marvelous. I kept the original master cylinder, but besides the disc brakes, I wanted the stronger Kingpins. So this is a change that you can make on a T-type TDTF MGA and put on the whole MGB front. Now you can't do that if you've got MGA disc wheels, theoretically, because the MGB uses 1/2-inch studs and MGA uses 7/16 studs to carry the wheels. But if you got wire wheels, no problem. The only problem comes sometimes, and absolutely on the T-type, is that when you go to put turn the tie rod into the tie rod end, it won't go far enough, and you end up with toe out. You can't get it in enough. So now you got to get a die, which is a sacrificial die, because the tie rod is hardened. I swear it's hardened more than anything else in the car. And cutting threads on that's just a bugger. You've got to get a die, and that's oh my gosh, on some of the cars it's like a 7/8 18. It's a huge thread. Find out what that size is, and you've got to cut more threads. And I know some people have had some trouble with the tie rod end rubbing on the inside of the rim of the wheel. This is the difference between T-types and A's using B front suspension. But those are just all little small problems that are overcome. You get, with the advantage of that, you get the MGB front disc brakes. That's nice. You get the much stronger Kingpin. That's really nice. So Bill, thank you very much. You still on, Bill? Bill's waited all this time for me to mention his name. I saw him on earlier. He's from down by Ann Arbor, Michigan. Douglas to everybody. Apple Hydraulics will bush your worn A-arms. Okay, so he's got, in the note here, he's got a note here about rebushing and so forth. So Mark, my 74.5 MGB did not have a sway bar. Oh my gosh, why did they take that off? 74.5 and 75. The bean counters got involved. We got to cheapen these cars up. We're spending too much money. We're losing our money on these cars. Take something off it. So they took off the sway bar. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. I added one and it made a great improvement in handling. Mark B. Are you still on, Mark B? I don't hear Mark B, but that is, I mean, it's just, that is the single most important thing that you can do to handling on the MGs, is to add that front anti-sway bar. Oh my gosh. What diameter sway bar did you use, please? And Mark says it was a 3/4. So that's a really huge, thick bar. The original bar is 9/16. The GT bar is 5/8. So he may be incorrect here about the 3/4. You can buy 3/4. You can buy 3/4, but the factory ones are smaller. So he also said he installed shorter, stiffer springs, and that to decrease the ride height. I'd argue with that a little bit because it changes the geometry of the front end a little bit. Let's see, here we got Simon Boothroyd. My 72 Midget came with no front anti-roll bar, so I added one recently. Enjoyable and easy job. Simon, are you still on?
I'm indeed. Good day.
And you're calling from?
Oh, I'm in the Seattle area. I sound like I'm not, but I am.
You don't sound like you are. That is correct. That is correct. But anyway, that's great. It's the holes on both sides are right there, just waiting for an anti-sway bar, and the A-arms, which are far more difficult to change than on an MGB.
They were horrible. They were horrible. Yeah. I use a blowtorch and a lot of cursing.
We at the shop we took our oxy-acetylene torch and turned on the exhaust fan and reduced those rubber bushings to carbon.
Yeah.
Carbon and oily smoke.
A lot of flame.
Yep, and a blowgun, so it wouldn't hurt the paint on the inner fender or top of the fender or something. So yeah, they're just a terror in there. Interestingly, those bushings on the inside of the A-arms are the same bushings that are used at the top of the shock on the MGB. So I love the continuity and the mixing and matching that all this MGB stuff does in the car. The car, you can feel the difference now when you're driving the car.
Oh, it's night and day. Yeah.
Okay, great. Where were you from originally?
Oh, England.
Well, England. I got that part, but
Plymouth, the original Plymouth.
Oh, all right. Okay. Okay, great.
Something else about those Midget spring pans is if your trunnion area is all worn out, Apple Hydraulics rebuilds those.
Okay, thank you. So there's the outer end of the A-arm, instead of having a nice bushing that goes through it like an MGB, it's got a 9/16 and a 5/8, both of them 16 threads per inch. Pin that goes through there, which is held into the bottom of the Kingpin with a little roll pin thing, a taper pin. And those things are just a terror to get apart. Oh my gosh, they're awful. And a new A-arm is expensive. So Apple Hydraulics will put in the new bushings. And some of the A-arms are drilled for the little triangular flange that holds the link that goes up to the anti-sway bar. But a lot of them are not drilled. It's no problem drilling one if you've got one to copy. The MGB, the front A-arms have got another great huge thick piece of metal welded into them, but the Midget A-arms don't. They've got three 5/16 bolts that hold this triangular flange. So anyway. Okay, thank you. Let's see. So you also added, Simon, you also added some adjustable tube shocks?
Oh yeah, I bought I was in England and went to the Frontline Developments place in Abingdon, actually, thinking about it. And met the owner and bought lots of things there. So the front conversion, so there's no I took the lever shocks off, actually the front and the back, they're all off, and replaced them with Frontline's suspension.
So if they got some sort of wishbone that comes down on both sides?
Yeah, on the front. Yeah.
Oh, that's so much nicer.
Oh,
So when the bug eye came out, I mean, John Thornley said it only weighed 1,400 weights. It's like I got to get my calculator out to exactly know what 1,400 weights is, but it was really lightweight. And then here, at least, pretty soon we got. When we go from the bug eye to the Sprite to the Midget, and then by 68, we've got reinforcing in the doors and yada yada. And then in 75, we dump in this cast iron gearbox and this bigger engine, that's all cast iron. We got the rubber bumpers on it, and it's still got that one single little arm coming down there. Oh my gosh, all of those, the camber goes negative, and the toe out just increases. It's just those are real. The Midget 1500s are really, really tough, but they do come with anti-sway bars. So anyway, thank you very much for that. Thanks. Tim Waller, greetings. A couple of meetings ago, someone commented about Michelin tires labeled made in Serbia or somewhere other than France. It was mentioned that some manufacturers sold out of old molds, and tires are being made in perhaps good factories. A Morgan friend contacted Michelin and was told they have factories in many locations, and they would send molds to various Michelin factories for production based on availability. The volume is so low, it isn't feasible for them to distribute them. They are contracted with Coker on this side of the water and Longstone over there. So this is just a quick comment about the Michelin tires. And we weren't sure where they came from, but obviously Coker Tires making from the molds, or having someone make from the molds, Michelin branded tires. So Blair Weiss, why is rebuilding shocks a specialist thing? Why can't they be rebuilt at home? I would only invite you to try to rebuild one. First of all, there's the rocking. First of all, let's see. Blair, are you still on?
Yeah, John, I'm here.
All right, I waited all this time. I just looked at some headlamps that Glenn had on his MGB, and I could tell that they were LEDs because it looked like they're like 5,000 Kelvin. I mean, those things are hot. They're really hot. I said, well, where are these from? Because Blair Weiss was on and talked all about those headlamps, and best ones to get. Yeah. So anyway, first of all, you got the axle that goes through the aluminum housing, right? So if you got to repair that, you got to rebush the aluminum housing, okay? If they're leaking, then you got to get seals, and nobody makes that seal. Peter Caldwell, I was talking to Peter Caldwell Worldwide, and he was backed up on it, building MGB shocks because the seals, he has them made for him because nobody else has that seal anymore. And they're swedged in on the outside. And if there's something wrong with the axle, then how are you going to repair that? And then you've got a cup seal on the rebound piston. And how do you get that collapsed to get it down into the cylinder? Other than that, I mean, you can take the cover off, you can take the valving out, you can wash them out, you can put new fluid in them. And where are you going to get the gasket? You got to make the gasket for the back cover, which is why you got to be so careful when you do it. So it's just it's inexpensive to send them out to. We always used Worldwide, so.
Right. I mean, I've never seen parts available, so.
No. They're you know, there's a lot of force involved. You gotta drive the axle out of the well, there's a little connector to the rods and pistons. And anyway, there are people who tell me, well, I rebuilt mine. I said, great, but oh my gosh, what a task. What a task. Your time is better spent doing something else. That's just me talking, but anyway. Okay, Tom from Seattle, previous owner installed tube shocks on all four wheels. It has been recommended the front tubes should be replaced with lever shocks. Would you concur? Will it make a big difference? Okay, Tom, are you still on from Seattle? Tom's gone. So if you got the original, you got to have the original shocks on there. Some people take the original shocks off and take the valving out. And then, of course, all the fluid runs out unless you take all the springs out and then put the valving back in so the lubrication stays there. Because you got to have this lever shock in the front that to hold the suspension correct. But we had one where the tube shocks in the front, there's a real heavy duty bracket, homemade. I mean, low production. It wasn't a heavy duty factory thing, but this thing was made and the shocks were attached to it. And the guy brought the car in for something or other else, took it back home, back to Detroit. One of the shocks broke and was dancing around underneath there and hit his brake line, pushed his brake line, pulled his brake line apart, the rubber brake line. And I wasn't keen on tube shocks anyway, but that's solidified it for me. I don't like tube shocks because of someone who's paid a lot more than I ever was designed that whole front suspension, and it's just fine the way it is. If you want stiffer shocks, put thicker oil in it, or buy the shocks that have got the dials on them that you can dial up the resistance to movement, or change the springs on the inside, or shim them so that you get more restriction. But there's nothing wrong with the shock that's up there right now, unless of course it's bad. And for 150, 200 bucks, you can get a shock back. You get one back that works. So I'm not keen on tube shocks in the front at all because of that one problem we had that one time. And to hook them up in the back, you got to take the spring mounts in the back and turn them upside down. And now the shocks are connected that much lower than the bottom of the leaf spring. And so now it's going to scrape on the speed bumps on your neighbor's driveway and so forth. So anyway, Ryan, I love the purple bushings that come from Australia, but now we know how to get them straight from there. So Bill Weekly comes in here about the Michelin tires. I recently put 165/15 Michelin XZX from Coker on MGA. They were labeled made in Serbia. I was a little leery of them, but as it turns out, they're very smooth up to 75 miles an hour with no balance weights. So that's nice. That means that they're really, really good right out of the box. That's really great. So we talked last time or the time before about wheels and tires, and most everybody is using Vredesteins. But these Michelin XZXs, those are just the nicest tires around. And that is it. We are done with the chat. So if someone wanted to ask something, follow up on something that we didn't touch on, we got 83 people still on tonight. So if you want to talk about anything, just come on in and make a comment. Otherwise, or very shortly, we will say our good nights.
John, just one question. Another on the chat, someone mentioned the front shocks coming loose. And it was something you discussed previously.
Yes.
And in his comment, I don't want to take away from his thunder, it was about lock washers and Loctite. So this is a common thing for the front shocks to come loose though.
Well, they're if they're tight, if they're really tight, they're going to stay there. But if they get a little tiny bit loose, they're going to start to move. They're aluminum, and the bolt going through them is steel, so they're going to get thinner. The flange is going to get thinner. The hole is going to get wallowed out. And I got a note from Barney Gaylord, who said that his MGA shocks are about the same as B shocks. And he said that when he realized there's a problem with his, I think it was held on. I think he said it was held on with a couple threads of one bolt, and a couple of them had broken off. So it's just real easy. You take a deep 9/16 socket and a 3/8 wrench and just go back in there and pull them. And sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes you get half a turn. You know, I mean, to what torque? I mean, when you're like really pulling. You know, I can't tell you what the torque actually would be, but probably up around 50 pounds, up around there. So you can really heave it. There are 3/8 bolts and go in there. So you want to tighten those every 12,000 miles, every five years. So I don't know. I don't use Loctite there, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt, but you do use lock washers. Yes, just tighten them up. Yeah.
I have a question, John.
Steve.
On the steering canceller for your turn signals, I have an aftermarket steering wheel I put on, and I don't remember which one I got. I don't recall. But the spacer that's on the steering column, the OEM spacer, is a very narrow spacer that fits onto the bottom of the steering wheel. And then when you turn your wheel, that cancels your turn signals.
What year?
I have an 80 MGB.
Okay, so there's a ring in the back of that with two blades that come out and fit into the turn. So you got to duplicate that somehow.
Yeah, but they have to be a wider, because it doesn't. I have to turn the wheel almost a whole full turn for it to cancel, and I don't always make a sharp enough turn, and then I'm driving around with my turn signal on. I think I seen somebody, I don't recall, a guy that was down in Florida somewhere, Rutman or something was his name, that makes some sort of a spacer for that. I didn't know if anybody else that was still on here ran across anything like that or not.
Well, we're listening here. If someone has,
I don't hear it.
I can see it in my head. Just something to go on the back.
It might be Michael Ruckman.
Yeah, I think that was his name. Yeah.
How would you contact him?
Well, that's a good question. I remembered the name because I had seen it on one of the MG sites that I'm a member of, and somebody mentioned it, but I have no idea. I think he's in Florida. I don't really know for sure, but
he's in Tampa.
Okay.
And I think his website is BritishCarInteriors.com or something like that.
Okay.
I should probably write
He's
that
all
down.
over Facebook Marketplace too. Just look him up on Facebook.
Oh,
Thank
he's
you,
on
Jim.
Facebook Marketplace. Oh, really? Oh, all
Yeah,
right.
he's always selling stuff on the sites, either Facebook or one of the MG sales groups. He's
Okay.
on a bunch of those. I don't know if it's
Okay.
Facebook Marketplace or the MG sale groups, but
Right.
go
Thank you. I
through the
appreciate
groups
it
and
very much.
he's always on there.
All right. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so frustrating when you buy another wheel and it's like, wait, how does this work? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I really like the wheel because it's like kind of custom and all like that, and it it just makes the interior pop a little bit. But
Yeah.
when it doesn't turn off the turn signals,
It's what a hassle. What a hassle. Yeah.
the other people on the road tend to get a little pissed. I don't know why. I mean, I know what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you.
You're welcome. Got anybody else? Any more questions? Anything else we can answer? I don't have my calendar in front of me. Let me take a look here and see. We're not going to do another one of these from Alabama. So it may be that I think we're looking at probably March 11th, probably March 11th and March 25th. I probably already have these written down, and these may not be the dates I already mentioned before, but I think it's going to end up being March 11th. Because March 4th, I'm still here in Alabama. But if I decide to do it on March 4th, I'll give everybody lots of information. The one on the 25th will be right after the event in Chicago. And again, if anyone's from Iowa, please get in touch with me, because Joe Alexander would like to get a ride into the swap meet. So anyway, that's the scoop for tonight. Ladies, gentlemen, and thank everybody for coming in. You can unmute yourself and make comments or
Thanks, John.
You can all say goodbye. Yep.
Thanks,
Hey,
John.
Fred, thank you very much. So it's helpful.
John, I appreciate it very much.
Pat,
Thank
Gary,
you.
thanks for straightening me out on the right name for a damper. Although I don't spell tire with a Y, but yeah.
Why not?
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Good night, all.
All right, good night. Marty, thanks for being on tonight. How many people we have tonight, Marty?
Oh, yes, hang on. 152 at 7:44 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, John, I got 152 as well. For once, Marty and I are in
We
agreement.
match.
Hey,
We
you're
match.
on. Here I'm in Alabama, and the only thing I can do, I guess, is put my hat on backwards, What else can I do? I didn't bring any hats I got my working hat, but that looks exactly like this, only dirty. So, so we can't have a hat competition. Barney, what are those shades you got on tonight? Oh my gosh, look at these, huh? You're muted. You're muted. You're still muted, Barney.
There we go. I'm just sitting under some really bright lights here, so I had my hat and my shades on tonight.
So you look like you have blue eyeballs. Yeah. So what'd you tell me? I can't. You sent me the email, but you said your shock was dangling by a couple of threads or something or other.
Yeah, we were on our way to Alaska. We got up into Yukon territory just before getting into Alaska. We drove up the coast highway, and about the time we hit the Alcan up there. And there were some bridges out, and we had to go through some rivers down into the river valley and up the other side. And there were all this 4-inch gravel in there to drive through. You come out the top and you kind of jump over the apex a little bit back onto the level. And about the third time we did one of those, I went through a little bit fast. And when it came down, the steering wheel was about 90 degrees out of whack.
Oh, no.
And one corner of the car was down a little bit. Apparently it had been loose for a long time because the steering wheel was tilted about 20 degrees for a long time. I said, we should check this out, right? Well, it broke and we're on the side of the road and jacked it up. And there's one broken bolt, 2 missing bolts, one of the holes had the thread stripped out of it. And the one bolt that was remaining was held on by 2 or 3 threads and bent. Just one bolt. So we were on the side of the road for about an hour and we finally got 2 bolts into the thing. And then we got to drive it into Anchorage very carefully, where we cleaned out a strip thread, put in heated coil, and got all 4 bolts back in it again. But that was a little scary. I wouldn't recommend it, that's why I was asking how often you tighten those bolts.
John Kinney was driving his TD on the highway at someplace in Illinois, and somebody came up next to him, and they're pointing at his front wheel, and he thought, well, something's wrong. I mean, they wouldn't be pointing. So he pulls off the road, and as soon as he stops moving, the wheel just falls off his camera, that pivots on the bottom, and off it comes with the shocks, and oh my gosh, yeah, that was a TD. So yeah, that hardly, I mean, these are the only 2, yours and Kinney's, I think, that I ever know of a shock coming that loose. I mean, we found them real loose in the shop, but not off. But sometimes you tighten them up, you can get a turn or 2 out of the bolts. So anyway.
Well, I have it on my periodic maintenance list now. I will check those bolts as often as I change transmission and differential fluid.
Yep.
Which is about 12,000 miles for me.
Okay.
Tighten up all the bolts before we take off on a trip. Everything that we can think about.
Easier to tighten them in your own carport than on the side of the road.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Well, Doug, thank you for counting tonight. So.
You're welcome. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, in about a month. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. I'll have to bring a special hat just for you. So, okay.
All right. Feelings mutual, John.
Okay, thanks. All right, ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here tonight. Drive your MG, enjoy your MG, go watch some more of my videos. And if you got any wisdom to impart, send stuff along, send it by email. I'm working here. That's why I'm in Alabama. It's quiet. I'm supposed to be getting my emails answered. Plan to come to, I see Jim Pastor on here. Plan to come to the Central Pennsylvania British Car Fest. Is that 30 this year, Jim? Or 29? You're muted.
It's 30. And you've been coming here at least 20.
I have.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's always a good time. We have a few spaces left for you too, by the way. So.
Thanks. First time I came, I got invited, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool stuff. One of his club members had paid for my flight out and everything, and I mean, how nice is that? So Jim's wife picked me up at the airport, and Jim wasn't off work yet. Now he's off work forever, and so we go down, and I wander into his shop, and I'm looking around, and here's remember right there at the front door, it was a milk crate, and in the milk crate was an intake manifold with a Smith's PCV valve on it. And I said, well, we're going to take this out to Grant's house. So we went out to Grant's house to figure out what's going on with his MGB, because it was smoking. I mean, this car was smoking like it left a huge plume of smoke behind it. I drove it before I tuned it.
He had the engine rebuilt first because it was smoking. And then it still smoked.
Yep. I decelerated, and I'm sitting idling, and I hit the throttle, and everything behind me disappeared in a cloud of smoke. I mean, this thing really, really, really smoked. And as Jim said, he'd already had the engine rebuilt to get rid of the smoking. So maybe it wasn't the engine that was causing the smoking. So when you do a tune-up, 4 steps in a tune-up, emissions, engine, ignition, and fuel in that order always. And this is, I don't know, 64B, something like that.
64.
it had a Smith's PCV valve on it. So one of the first things I did was pop the cover off the Smith's PCV valve, and there on the inside of the PCV valve was a brand new diaphragm, but it had been made incorrectly and it was a little too small and it had slipped out of position. So we put the used diaphragm from the intake manifold and PCV valve that I'd purloined out of Jim's shop and taken up there, put that in it, done. And granted, had the engine rebuilt to get rid of the smoke. So that's why you always do the cheapest, fastest, easiest things first, even if you don't think it's going to make a difference, because it can sometimes save you a lot of trouble, a lot of time, a lot of money. Anyway, I could keep talking all night, but I
That's
won't.
right. Hey, don't forget to send in Nut and Farrow.
I was going to send it today, but it must have been what, President's Day, another federal holiday.
All right, thanks.
At the
Good night.
at the peak of the Roman Empire, I think they had about 3 holidays per week besides the weekend. You know, so we're not even to one day a week yet, but we've got a solid one day a month. So anyway, yep, I'll send that tomorrow. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a pleasure always. Safety.
Good night, everyone. Thanks, John.
Good night, John. Good night, John. Thank you.
Bye, all.
Good night, John. Have a good day. Bye-bye. That's good.